Don't just live for tomorrow, or just live in yesterday. Just be glad for all you have that's in today. And though you've come through many obstacles.
Hey everyone, Connie here, and welcome to my blind reaction to Fighting with My Family. This is a donation award for Smurf, once again, our third movie in a week that's been a Smurf donation, but that's because there are no other movie donations at the moment, and Smurf just keeps bringing things up. So yeah, whatever works, right? If you wish to donate, you can, though. As long as I haven't seen the movie, any movie from any period of time is good. Doesn't matter content or country of origin, etc. All of that's okay. Donations are completely optional, though. If you don't want to or can't, then don't feel the pressure. It's all optional, and none of my content on the channel will be restricted anyway. Everyone will get to see anything I record. So, yeah. But if you do have any ideas, any suggestions, feel free to mention them in the comments. I can tell you if I've seen them or not. And if you, again, can and want to donate for them, you can. Any amount of donation gets you a reward. So, yeah. But that being said, Fighting with My Family. So, this is a fictionalized take on the story of pro wrestler Paige. And that's the main thing I know about it. Like, I don't know, like, any actors who play the role of the real life wrestlers. I think there are actually some real life wrestlers in this. Like, I think The Rock is in it, for example. But I don't know exactly who is and who isn't, and yada yada. I do know this is WWE Studios, which I would assume means there's some actual wrestlers, but honestly, if it's just about wrestlers, for the most part, couldn't they just get the wrestlers to play themselves? Like, I just feel like that would just make the most sense. I don't know. Either way, so let's talk about me and wrestling. I have been a big fan of wrestling since, pro wrestling at least, since about 2005. It was, I want to say November of 2005 when I first started watching. The first episode I watched was actually the memorial show for Eddie Guerrero. But I knew who he was, and I knew who a lot of the wrestlers were because of video games. Even prior to watching wrestling, I did play the games, the various N64 games and whatnot, PlayStation games, basically whatever was out at the time, I would be playing it. I like to create the wrestlers and whatnot and just see, like, who I could pit against each other, basically. At the time, a lot of those games weren't, like, super expansive, but I did what I could as a kid, you know. But I ended up, like, getting into it. I checked out other promotions and stuff throughout the years, and eventually I stopped watching WWE. And the reasons were because the content was starting to stray less into pro wrestling and more into what the term they used and coined is sports entertainment. It started becoming more about basically making money than actually giving the fans what they want and providing a good sports company. And a lot of the decisions they started making were terrible. From who the champions would be to reigns just ending at the wrong time, really bad storylines, really bad gimmicks, disrespecting their talents, and so on and so forth. And at first it was with things like the PG era, which completely made everything about it basically kid friendly, when pro wrestling was not supposed to be like that in the first place. Um, and then they started again just doing the horrible storylines, characters focusing on the wrong wrestlers at the wrong times, and eventually just went into fully disrespecting some of their best talents, some of the ones that were the most over from the fans. And yeah, it just got to a point where I couldn't watch anymore. And it's gotten even worse since since I stopped watching. Even to the point where some people who were a lot more forgiving about WWE than I was have even dropped it now. Luckily, another company called All Elite Wrestling, AEW, came out a few years back as basically a big rival company to WWE, being run by, organized by, and featuring former WWE wrestlers who basically had enough with how they were being mistreated in the company. You had guys like Cody Rhodes, you had guys like Chris Jericho, big names. And as more and more talents either left or were really unceremoniously released from WWE, they kept coming and are still coming to AEW. Huge name talents like Jon Moxley and Pac and William Regal. Huge names. And they've become bigger names in AEW than they honestly could have ever been in recent years in WWE. But when you have WWE pushing people like Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar over, actual talents, that's what you're going to get. WWE's ratings have been going down the drain. AEW's have been rising. So, we see who gets the last laugh. But the point in all of this is I have not been a WWE fan in a long time. And I do know who Paige is. I was never that big of a fan of her. I didn't hate her or anything. I never actually actively disliked her like I do with Charlotte Flair, who is just outright terrible. But she was never one of those wrestlers, one of those female wrestlers for me who were really, really good, or just even either in the ring or on the mic. She could never hold a candle to greats like Lita or Beth Phoenix, or even more modern ones like Asuka. It's like a lot of these wrestlers have just been so amazing, and Paige was just kind of meh for me. She just never really did it. So it's, and from what I know, and I could be partly wrong here, but I don't even think I ever heard WWE fans talking about her a lot. I heard, even in more recent years, female wrestlers like the Bella Twins would get a lot more attention. Or Ember Moon, or others like that. It's like Paige is just one of those who always kind of flew under the radar for me. So it's interesting that she was the one chosen to get her own movie like this. Now, I suppose it's partially because of maybe there was a story to tell there. I guess, whatever the story of her journey into pro wrestling is, there was something about that they decided would make a good film. I don't know what it is. I could not say. So we'll just kind of have to see. But I can tell you one thing for sure, is that I am very sure this movie is going to bullshit you. And not just because it's obviously a fictionalized account of her life and everything, and her story going into wrestling. This is produced by WWE. This is their film. They're going to try to make it look a lot better than it is. Because that's their goal. They want WWE, its product, its matches, its wrestlers to look as good as possible. But if you actually watch WWE, you'll see the opposite. You'll see matches that are actually terrible. You'll see wrestlers that have no ability getting pushed over the wrestlers who do. And the wrestlers who do aren't even allowed to show their true ability, because then it would put them too over. And Vince only wants people like Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns to be put over. And it's just, they're going to bullshit you. They're going to make it look like they're doing like a lot more actual pro wrestling than they are. WWE is so fucking scripted and faked. It's like, it's not funny. And yes, to a degree, all pro wrestling is quote unquote fake. Yeah, obviously there's a lot of practice and a lot of working together before matches to get things right. But with a lot of these better companies, they, one, don't make it so obvious, and two, don't do as much to fake it. Companies like the recently defunct Ring of Honor, which has been bought by AEW president Tony Khan, AEW itself, New Japan Pro Wrestling, yeah, of course they plan things out, but not anywhere near to the degree. They make a lot of these matches feel more real and fresh and less scripted. And to a degree, they are less so on all of that. Well, less scripted. You know what I mean. So it's like, I just feel like this movie's gonna be trying to make itself look, or rather the WWE and the wrestlers in it, look a lot better than they actually are. Just because, you know, the WWE doesn't want their talents to actually be represented like they are in real life. But I'm going to go into this with an open mind and see how the movie is actually presented. If it's still done in an entertaining way, it's still done in an entertaining way. And if the movie is still enjoyable, it's still enjoyable. But I acknowledge that there's likely a lot of just liberties taken in terms of the story being told compared to real life. And again, I acknowledge they're going to make themselves look a lot better than they actually are. But either way, we'll begin this and just see what it has in store. So when the screen fades to black, pause this redirect and go to the description below. Follow the link to the reaction, and after you watch it, come back here to the redirect and resume play. Because after it fades black and then fades back in, everything from that point forward will be my afterthoughts and will contain spoilers to the movie. So, with that being said, thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you at the reaction. And we are back, and we'll begin with spoilers in 3, 2, 1, now. So before anything, I wanted to look up to see how much in this is accurate. So I grabbed my phone in between, and I put it in like, okay, let me see what's accurate. So according to this, all the broad strokes are accurate. Paige, real name Soraya Jade Bevis or Beavis. Her last name's not really Knight. Played in the movie by Florence Pugh. Comes from a family of British wrestlers. Her dad, Rowdy Ricky Knight, played by Nick Frost in the movie. Her mom, Sweet Soraya, played by Lena Headey. Her older siblings, Roy and Zach, are wrestlers too. As in the film, the family owns and operates the World Association of Wrestling, along with a training school. And as in the film, both Zach and Paige, who wrestled as Brittany Knight in her family's promotion, were recruited by WWE and invited to participate in the local tryouts. The WWE gave Paige a contract, they rejected Zach. So all of that is true. If you want to fact check the film for yourself, watch the Channel 4 documentary that the film is loosely based on, The Wrestlers, Fighting with My Family. So apparently Dwayne Johnson saw that and wanted to make it into more of a feature film, which is how we got this. If you watch The Wrestlers, you'll see one pretty significant change to the story after Paige and Zach's tryouts. In the documentary, the WWE accepts Paige but doesn't give Zach a definitive no. Instead, they tell him he needs to get in better shape. If he can improve his physique, they might give him a second chance. And this goes into something else I found out in between looking things up. He actually wrestled in the WWE in 2011. It wasn't a full contract or anything. But he did wrestle in a on-screen televised match in 2011. So apparently, yeah, it wasn't as definitive as this movie made it seem. A lot of the documentary follows the real Zack as he works out, cleans up his diet, gets uncomfortable spray tans, and tries to mold himself into the prototype of the WWE superstar. He doesn't ever get there, which is why the writer-director of the film simplified the storyline. Zack getting completely rejected right away makes for a stronger conflict with Paige, who must now proceed to WWE without him. Again, he made it for one match. He did get to compete for one match, and he was a squash. It was a squash match. He was a jobber, or a journeyman, as they called it in this movie. Because again, as I said in the reaction, I don't think WWE likes the term jobber for some reason. But that's basically what it was. It was a one-time thing. He never got an actual contract. The documentary shows some of Paige's life when she moves to the US to work for the WWE, and parts of it are recreated in the movie almost exactly, like the Skype calls with Ricky and Zack back in England. There are some changes to the real story again, mostly for the sake of expediency. In Merchants Fighting With My Family, Paige goes straight from England to Orlando and NXT, the developmental training program. New signees to the company go to the Performance Center in Florida, where they learn the skills they need to graduate to the main roster, the contracted wrestlers who appear live on Raw and SmackDown. Paige went through all of that, but when she first signed with WWE in 2011, NXT didn't even exist. So that's a big change. Instead, she went to WWE's previous developmental territory, Florida Championship Wrestling, based out of Tampa. She wrestled in FCW for several months before the entire program moved to Orlando. So yeah, NXT didn't even exist at the time, so they changed up a little things there. Probably they didn't want to go into the entire FCW stuff because they had kind of left that behind them at that point. After FCW is when Paige moved to NXT, which is slightly different than it appears in the movie. The fictional version looks like a training school for wrestlers with occasional shows. In reality, it's more like AAA baseball to the WWE's Major League. Well, to be fair, it started out as more of a training, a developmental territory. It became more of a third brand eventually. It didn't start off that way, though. Before Paige was ever the Divas Champion on Raw, she was the first ever NXT Women's Champion. In fact, she was still NXT Women's Champion the night she made her Raw debut against AJ Lee. Played in Fighting With My Family by current WWE wrestler Zelina Vega. Okay, so that wasn't even AJ Lee in there. Okay. I didn't even realize that. Making Paige a little more inexperienced puts her into the role of an underdog in that big AJ Lee match. Which is silly because wrestling matches are staged and their outcomes are predetermined, so she's not an underdog at all. Yeah, I mentioned that in the reaction as well. It's like she knew beforehand she was going to win that. It was all planned. Even, like, to a degree, what she was going to say before and after were planned. Whether she flubbed that up in the beforehand and just got stage fright, that's possible. But the aftermath part, it's like very clearly like she would have been told like what she can say, what she can't. She would have worked it off with them, and they would have given her a basic outline, and it's like, this is what you say, introduce yourself and all that, and she basically just has to give the specifics without saying certain things or using certain words or whatnot. In the fiction film, Paige basically gets stage fright and freezes as she comes out. In reality, she looked extremely poised in her debut. Okay, I don't know if I ever saw her debut, but okay. If she ever forgot her lines, you wouldn't know it. So it could have still happened, but you just wouldn't know it from seeing because she looked poised. As you see in that clip, there's a clip on this camera of the real match. After Paige pins AJ, she made a hasty retreat up the ramp to backstage. There wasn't, okay, the afterwards promo didn't happen in real life. Okay. See, surprisingly though, one of the other most fanciful seeming parts of the movie is actually true. The scene where The Rock breaks the news to Paige that she's getting called up on the main roster, to her family and all. Apparently that was true. In the film, they meet The Rock at the tryout, yada yada. That moment never really took place. But Johnson, The Rock, was the one who told Paige she was heading to Raw. Okay. So basically, I'm just going to leave it there, to not have this entire thing be that. But there were some obvious differences. It's a movie adaptation of a real story that's also based on a already existing documentary. They have to ham it up a little bit to make it work as a film. And as a movie, just alone as a movie, ignoring the real life connections and everything, this was actually really damn good. The pacing was good. The characters were well acted. All of them did a great job. Florence Pugh, Nick Frost, Lena Headey, all of them did a great job. Vince Vaughn was really good in this, actually. I really liked him in this. When I first saw his name in the credits, like, my mind was kind of thinking, like, okay, how is he going to play this? Because Vince Vaughn can do both very comedic roles and very serious roles. So it's like, how is he going to play this? And it was actually a very serious role, and he did a good job. I like that we got to see plenty of real wrestlers in this, from Big Show to Sheamus to, actually being in there, The Rock and all. When did this movie... Let me check that real quick again. When did this movie come out? Because I'm assuming that the reason that they didn't use any footage until, the credits of the real Paige and the real AJ Lee is because they were already retired at that point. Okay, this was 2019. This is actually more recent than I thought. For some reason, I thought this was 2017 or 2018. But no, it was 2019. And the documentary is from 2012. So yeah, that's probably why the real AJ Lee wasn't in there for that scene. Instead, they recreated the first match using Zelina Vega and Florence Pugh. Going back to look at it here. Let me see if I can go back to that real quick. Maybe. Oh yeah, that's very clearly not AJ. Now that I'm looking at it and thinking about it, that's very clearly not AJ Lee. Just in the moment, I was kind of like thinking like they'd probably have AJ Lee actually be in this, but you can very much tell. Like they make her up to kind of look like her, and obviously wearing the same or similar ring gear or whatnot. But that's very clearly not AJ. But again, if this was being filmed and stuff, which it would have been after their retirement, it's like, and the retirement was due to injury and all, it's like not really much you can do about that. So yeah, I'm okay with that. It's just I didn't realize that wasn't AJ at first. It just didn't click with me, I guess. But yeah. So as a movie, again, this was really good. It was well directed. It was well shot. But even ignoring just the changes they obviously made, as someone who, again, going into this knowing the company and knowing, the fact that obviously Paige made it in the company, the youngest ever Divas champion, all that jazz, the sense of tension in this was non-existent. And that's a problem for a movie that really kind of was trying to have that drama. Whether in Paige's life and career, her brother, It was very much trying to give us that drama. The only problem is that kind of stuff relies on tension. And when you have a story that's based on a true story, when you have a true story being adapted to film, the problem is that a lot of times takes away the tension because you know what's going to happen. You know that it's going to work out. At no point in this was I concerned that Paige was ever going to actually really quit. At no point in this was I concerned that anything was really going to go wrong because I knew it didn't. that is just that is my biggest issue with this, because it was very clearly trying to rely on that tension in order for certain parts of the movie to work. And while the movie was just in general, like in terms of entertainment as a film, well directed, well written, well paced, and well acted, the lack of tension when they were legitimately trying to have tension in there and scenes that required tension, that is distracting. On top of that, in my pre-thoughts, I did mention that this movie was very much going to try to make WWE look good. It was very much going to try and glamorize how things are. Now, keep in mind, the events in this movie happened in 2010, 2011? So, mind you, that was before WWE really nosedived. Because I went to WrestleMania in 2011. You might have seen me wearing the t-shirt I got from there in multiple reaction videos. I was at that WrestleMania. That was when it was in Atlanta, Georgia, right before I moved back up to Michigan, because my family moved down to Georgia for 2 years, my last 2 years of high school, actually. And so it was like that same year, basically months before I moved back up to Michigan, and I was surprised the Christmas of 2010 with the tickets, and I went with my father. And I was rooting for CM Punk at the time. So yeah. And now, that was when I was still kind of a fan. Although at that point I had already started to kind of lose a little bit of faith in the company, I was still kind of there for the time being. It wasn't until a couple years later, really started in 2013, I believe, and then even a couple years after that, really just started to hit it even further. Maybe 2015, 2016 is when I really started losing interest. I started watching other wrestling programs and eventually just kind of stopped watching pro wrestling because there was nothing really televised that I was super into, and I wasn't I wasn't searching things up online much at that time to try and dig things up or look at other companies. I would occasionally see a match from companies like New Japan Pro Wrestling and whatnot, but I didn't actively watch their shows too much. It was just I'd see matches here and there. I'd see promos here and there of certain wrestlers. So I very often knew a lot of other wrestlers who nowadays have gotten a lot bigger, whether they had time in WWE after that fact or are in AEW now or whatnot. But I never super actively watched shows consistently. There were some that I did, but not a lot. But the point is, I stopped watching for the most part until AEW happened. And now I'm watching actively again. Because I like AEW, because it focuses on the wrestling. It's not as scripted as WWE is. Believe it or not, most of the wrestlers in AEW get to write their own promos. They get to decide what they say. And you get a lot less censorship because of that, which is a good thing, by the way. They also get to decide a lot more of what they do in the ring, which again, a lot better. It makes the matches more exciting. But yeah, there were a lot of points in this movie that, even for 2011, was clearly trying to paint this really good picture of WWE. It was trying to make it seem like this pro wrestling dream. And even in 2011, it really kind of wasn't anymore. Like, yeah, to a lot of wrestlers, sure, of course it is. But for just general fans, things had begun to drop off. And so it's like they definitely made it seem a lot better than it was. And considering, again, this movie came out in 2019, probably being worked on the previous year and all, it's going to be like, yeah, they have to pretend to be something that they, at that time especially, currently weren't. Because in 2019, it's like, oh no. Oh, no, 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 no. But they did actually address a couple funny things in the movie that it's like, are you, like, WWE made this movie. This is a WWE production. And they're actively admitting in this film that they hire models and cheerleaders and stuff most of the time over actual female wrestlers. That's not a good look. And yeah, some of those can actually become better. Some of those can improve and become genuinely good wrestlers. I'm not saying that if you were a cheerleader or a model or whatnot prior to wrestling, that's a bad thing necessarily. But the problem is WWE oftentimes prioritized them because of their looks. It was entirely a physical-based reason, but, you know, looks rather than actual physical skill in the ring. And again, that's not always the case. And there are some who had both, who were just gorgeous looking, but also could really, really handle themselves in the ring. So it's like, you kind of have that mixed bag, but then you have like the Bella twins, who it's like, oh, we're models, we're just going to be hired into wrestling kind of out of the blue, and it's like, Jesus. And it's like, they're not good. I'm sorry. I don't care what anyone says. I might be in the minority on that, but the Bella twins aren't good. They never were good. I don't care if one of them is married to Bryan Danielson. He's one of the best. That doesn't make her good. But focusing on what this movie was, yeah, again, I think it was, as a film, entertaining. I was entertained. I was having fun. I laughed at quite a few moments in this. It was cool getting to see names that I knew. And again, this takes place during a time where I was into wrestling. And I still am again, but just not WWE. And it was cool getting to see the more independent pro wrestling circuit that their family runs, and how that works. And just the fact that her brother was training a blind wrestler. That's insane. That's awesome. And getting to see even the training stuff. And I don't know how accurate all of the training stuff was. Like, I don't know if they actually do all of what they showed in there. Like the army crawl on the beach and everything, the tire flipping. It's like, do they actually do that? They might be hamming that up a little bit. But it was still entertaining. And again, Florence Pugh knocked it out of the park. She did a great job as Paige, gave a really likable performance as the character version of the real person. You know what I mean. And Vince Vaughn, again, did really well. Nick Frost, Lena Headey, it was good. It was good. I enjoyed it. But there were those couple issues that they were noticeable for me the entire time. And they were things that took me just a tiny bit out of it. But overall, very good film. So thank you to Smurf Vlogs for choosing this as a donation reward. I don't know if Smurf has any other plans at the moment, but as always, if you wish to donate for anything, I am always open to doing so, to accepting any donations, no matter how small, no matter how big. All donations receive a donation reward, always. As long as I haven't seen it, you're good. It doesn't matter what era it's from, it doesn't matter what genre it is, it doesn't matter if it's animated or live action. You can request anything as long as I haven't seen it. So don't worry about whether or not you think I'll like it or not, because honestly, I don't know. I never know if I'm going to end up actually liking a film, because I've been surprised and ended up hating films that I thought I would like, and I've ended up loving films I thought I would hate, even in reactions on this channel. So never worry about that. If you have something that you would love to see a reaction to, feel free to donate it for it, but only if you can and want to. It is completely optional. If you don't want to, if you can't, then don't worry about it. You're never obligated to do so. It's just for anyone who does want to, who can, who wants to have more of an input in reactions on the channel. And it's a good way to bring in movie reactions for the channel. This can include newer stuff too, even stuff that's just been released digitally and all. That's all good. But like I said, completely optional, and there's no worries if you can't, because all content on the channel will always be available to everyone. It'll never be behind a paywall, and you'll never have to worry about missing out on anything, no matter what. But yeah, there's also poll reactions that will be starting up soon. We have our first poll reaction to the Cuphead show coming soon, and we'll have more coming in the future after that. So that's another way to get people who can't pay to have an input. But it doesn't replace donation rewards, because those are separate slots. Donation rewards still going through. And remember, not just movies. You can donate for shows, YouTube videos, anything you want me to react to. And you're all good. And again, completely optional though, but just gotta let you know. Especially since, as I said, as of current, this is the only movie reaction we still have. Because for the past few weeks, basically we've just been working movie reactions for donation rewards on Smurf Vlogs donations alone. Which is fine, but again, if anyone wishes to donate and has the ability to, feel free. It's done via PayPal. You can contact me in the comments or wherever regarding that. And we can check in on the movie and see if it's something I haven't seen and everything. It's all good. But either way, thank you so much for tuning in. And let me know down in the comments below, what did you think of Fighting With My Family? Are you a wrestling fan as well? What do you think of the portrayals? And if you are a wrestling fan, like, who are some of your favorite wrestlers? What promotions do you tend to lean towards? Let me know down in the comments below. And for now, I'm Connie, and I'm signing off. See y'all next time.